There aren't many demonic possession cases out there in the world, but today the cases of George Lukins, Michael Taylor, and more are here to terrify and educate y'all. Question for you, what's the worst case of demonic possession you've ever heard about? Let me know in the comments and let's get into these ones. So, the Reverend Joseph Easterbrook, the Anglican vicar of Temple Church, was summoned on Saturday the 31st of May of 1778 by a Mrs. Sarah Barber, a woman who was traveling in the village of Yatton Mendip in the county of Somerset. Now the woman told the pastor that she came across a man by the name of George Lukins, a tailor and common carrier by profession who had a strange sickness, if you will, in which he sang and screamed in various sounds, some of which did not resemble a human voice, and declared that doctors could do him no service. Now, Mrs. Barber attested to the clergyman that George had an extraordinary good character and attended services of worship, where he had received the church sacraments, so all around a good guy. However, for the past 18 years he had been subject to a lot of fits, which somebody believed resulted from a supernatural slap which knocked him down while he was acting in a Christmas pageant of all things. Now he was consequently taken under the care of Dr. Smith, among many other physicians who really tried to help him, but sadly after his 20-week stay at St. George's Hospital, the medical community there pronounced him incurable. Now members of the community began to think that he was bewitched, and he himself declared that he was possessed by 7 demons who could only be driven out by, well, 7 clergymen. So Reverend Joseph Easterbrook contacted Methodist ministers in connection with all of this, who agreed to pray for George. Now we do have a quote from one of the reverends involved in the exorcisms, a Reverend John Valton. He said that some time ago I had a letter requesting me to make one of these 7 ministers to pray over George. I cried out before God, Lord, I am not fit for such a work. I have not faith to encounter a demon. It was powerfully applied. God in thy might. The day before we were to meet, I went to see George, and found such faith that I could then encounter the 7 devils which he said tormented him. I did not doubt, but deliverance would come. Suffice to say, when we met, the Lord heard prayer and delivered the poor man. So an account of the exorcism was actually published in the Bristol Gazette. The newspaper reported that George, during his possession, claimed he was the devil, made barking noises, sung an inverted song, and was just overall very violent. And in light of these claims, on Friday the 13th of June of 1778, 7 clergymen, including the Reverend Joseph Easterbrook, accompanied George to the vestry at Temple Church, where they performed an exorcism on the man, which included hymn singing, prayer, all the usual stuff. The deliverance concluded when the demons were allegedly cast out using the Trinitarian formula. The clergyman commanded the demons to return to hell, and George then exclaimed, "Blessed Jesus," praised God, recited the Lord's Prayer, and then thanked the clergyman. Now, Reverend Easterbrook, when recording the events under the patronage of John Wellesley, stated that the account would be doubted in this modern era of skepticism, but pointed to the scriptures and other authentic history of ancient as well as modern times to really explain what he felt was a valid case of demonic possession. Once again, after the exorcism, George was calm and happy. Now, following this case, several pieces of literature were printed on this entire situation, thus popularizing this case of diabolical possession, despite the original plans to keep it kind of quiet, for George's sake. In the spring of 1842, Pastor Johann Christoph Blumhardt was advised by his parishioners to investigate the strange goings-on at the home of the Dittus siblings. Orphaned and bereaved of several other siblings as well, 4 of them, Gottliebin, Anna Maria, Katharina, and another, lived together in a tumble-down house under the conditions of extreme poverty. But that wasn't the primary target of concern. It was the noises, the strange lights, and above all, the strange behavior of, I'm going to call her G, that called for further examination. Now, when he arrived at the place, G didn't really respond warmly to the pastor's friendly overtures. He let her be, but then neighbors were still complaining. She fell down, she fell ill, the noises in the house were so loud they kept them up at night. So Johann told the siblings to stay with a relative overnight, while he and trusted members of the congregation searched the house. And that's where they found a lot of weird stuff, and his fears were confirmed. They found evidence of dabbling in occult magic, and oh bother. Now, further inquiry revealed that G's early life had been filled with attempted initiations into such dark traffic at, well, why? Her elders did it. Spiritualist studies weren't really unknown at the time, and reputable figures investigated a lot of reports of poltergeists, conversations with the dead, spirits of all kinds. It's kind of commonplace. Johann was, determined. He decided to try and pray and place his trust in the Lord. But things didn't get better for G. If anything, they got worse, especially when Johann came near. She fainted, she shook, she foamed at the mouth in delirious fits, then she would come to and appear and, well, be sane, I guess, for all intents and purposes. Johann eventually became convinced that whatever was at work was in fact the devil, or a devilish spirit. One night in late June, G once again fell into a trance. Now this time, Johann grabbed her hand, shouted into her ear, "Place your hands together and pray. Lord Jesus, help me. We have seen long enough what the devil can do. Now we desire to see also what Jesus can do." And somehow, G regained consciousness, joined the pastor in prayer, and settled down again. And from then on, Johann's strategy didn't vary. He kept her company. He prayed with her. He invited her to pray as well. The prayers were simple and spontaneous. If the spirits tried to talk to Johann, he told them to keep silent. If they refused, he left. But here's the thing. G continued to suffer attacks, and they increased in scale and severity. She pummeled herself, yanked out her own hair, spat as if trying to purge from within, lost weight to a dangerous degree. It got really bad. She would hemorrhage, and she would attribute the wounds to spirits. Almost a year after the pastor's first visit, she began to upchuck objects. We're talking sand, nails, shoelaces, pins, and then they came out through her skin, but they would leave no wound. By Christmas of 1843, this struggle had lasted for almost 2 years, and by the end of that year, G wasn't the only one dealing with demonic harm. Her sister, Katerina, her brother, all struggling as well. As usual, Johann went to sit with them. He prayed with them and for them. Katerina was in such a state that she was trying to tear herself to pieces, but then, at about 2 in the morning, she let a loud noise, loud enough to shake the house, doubled over backward, and then shouted, "Jesus is victor!" And so he was. Somehow, the evil spirits were defeated. With that cry of defeat and, joy, I suppose, the demons were broken, as were the spell that had been held over the entire family. All the alarming manifestations stopped, and G and her sisters and brothers were back to being themselves again. So the next story. The whispers started in April of 2003 in the mind of this 23-year-old nun. In the heart of an Orthodox convent in Romania's impoverished northeast, doctors say Maricica Irina Cornici believed she heard the devil talking to her, telling her she was sinful. Now, originally she was treated for schizophrenia, but when she relapsed, a monk and 4 nuns tried a different method, exorcism. Now, in order to restrain her from violent movements, including those causing her to harm herself, the nuns bound her hand and feet and locked her in her room as they participated in the liturgy commemorating the ascension of Jesus. A few days later, they chained her to a cross with her arms stretched out and carried her into the church so that they could anoint her. Well, by the way, on top of this bad stuff earlier, she was gagged with a towel and left in a really dank room at the convent for 3 days without food, where, she died of dehydration. So originally, when she was moved to her room, she was untied and she was cured. She was given bread and tea, but when she fainted after eating, the nuns couldn't awaken her, and when they felt that her pulse was weak, they called an ambulance. Well, in the ambulance, she was given about 6 doses of adrenaline, so by the time she reached the hospital, she was gone from us. The police were notified by the doctors at the hospital, who noticed the marks that were left from all the restraining. The autopsy claimed that she had passed from dehydration, exhaustion, and a lack of oxygen. Now, the father and the 4 nuns who had helped with this exorcism were charged with death and depriving a person of liberty. Prosecutors sought a life sentence for the priest, but he was sentenced in 2007 to 14 years in prison, while the nuns got 5 to 8 years. So next up, this rare and disturbing footage has been released of a woman writhing around on the floor and screaming as an exorcism is performed on her over in Argentina. The 22-year-old woman, identified only by her first name Laura, is pinned to the ground as Bishop Manuel Acuna drives the evil spirits out of her. As she screams "no, no" and spits some really bad words out at one of the women holding her, the bishop is heard muttering, leave her now." Now, before the exorcism, locals gathered at the church in Buenos Aires, praying for her soul and redemption. The bishop told them the demon exists. Laura was then led into a chamber where church helpers held her to the ground. Local man Augustus Amador Arevalo, who had gone to pray for her, said, "We could hear her screaming and crying as we prayed for her deliverance. Apparently she was like a good person, but when the devil possessed her, yikes. She had to be exorcised. She had to be set free." The exorcism came to an end as she suddenly gave out a really weird cry and then closes her eyes, falls backwards, exhausted, wiping away tears as the priest once again made the sign of the cross over her body. And the bishop said she was good. He said, "Thank God, we've recovered a daughter of God." And finally for today, back in the 1970s, Michael Taylor was kind of an ordinary guy over in Yorkshire. He, his wife Christine, their offspring, and their pet poodle lived really happy lives. And now we're gonna pop that bubble. In 1974, Christine stated to a Christian fellowship group, to which they both belonged, that his relationship with the leader of the group, Marie Robinson, was carnal in nature. Michael admitted that he felt evil within him, and eventually attacked Marie verbally, who screamed back at him. Marie said that his eyes began to change to something bestial, and then he started to speak in tongues. Michael had no memory of the event, something all too common in cases of possession. Now during the next meeting, he received an absolution, but his behavior continued to become more erratic. So as a result, the local vicar called in other ministers, experienced in deliverance in preparation to cast out the demons residing within the man. Now this exorcism, which occurred between the 5th and 6th of October of 1974 at St. Thomas's Church in Gobber, was led by Father Peter Vincent, who was the Anglican priest of St. Thomas's, and was helped out by a Methodist clergyman, the Reverend Raymond Smith. Over the next 8 hours, Michael would repeatedly have crucifixes stuffed inside of his mouth while being doused with holy water. Now according to Bill Ellis, an authority on folklore and the occult in contemporary culture, the exorcists believed that they had, in an all-night ceremony, invoked and cast out at least 40 demons, including those of, well, some really bad stuff, blasphemy, bestiality, and lewdness. In the end, exhausted, they allowed Taylor to go home, but they were like, I think he still has some demons. Well, go figure. While at home, he brutally ended the life of his wife, Christine, by attacking her with his bare hands, tearing some body parts out, and almost tearing her face off. He was eventually found by a policeman, completely nude in the street and covered in red fluid. Well, at his trial, he was acquitted on the grounds of insanity and was sent to the Broadmoor Hospital for 2 years, then spent another 2 years in a secure ward in Bradford before being released. And that's it for me once again, folks. I've been Alexa, your resident ookie spooky girly. See y'all next time, you lovely spooky people.